So I'm definitely going to get distracted by my mint chocolate chip ice cream, but I did think it would be fun to rank all of the dungeons in the War Within. Now, the reason I want to do this is because I saw someone do this yesterday. Amazing player by the name of Shindig. He was ranking them from a DPS perspective, and I had some thoughts. There are a few of these dungeons that were absolutely terrible from a tank or a healer perspective that weren't so bad as a DPS, I will say. But there's a lot of dungeons that immediately come to mind that I was like, I don't ever want to do this again. There have never been more dungeons potentially than this particular The War Within expansion, where you just got fatigued tanking. Unbelievable moments where at the end of a key, you did not feel good, you felt relief. There is an easy answer to what is in the unsalted beans category. Everyone knows it. If you have tanked and slash or if you have healed, but specifically you have tanked. Obviously, what is the worst dungeon of the War Within? What's the one dungeon that you would never want to do again? There's clearly an answer to this question. There's actually not even really up for debate. It's obviously Grim Batol. The Grim Butthole of dungeons. This dungeon is terrible. It's actually so bad. The reasons that it's so bad, no, all of you, because there's arguments to be made for all of the things that you guys are mentioning, except this. This as a tank, you had every single pull, first of all, was just randomly tuned so highly. And there was no good reason for it whatsoever, okay? If you didn't tank this season, let me explain to you what was it. You remember how often your tanks would die in Grim Batol? So the very first pull, there were technically only two tank busters. The small mobs did a small tank buster, and the big mobs put the rive on you. There was only one of them, or two, depending on how you pulled it, in a higher key level. This is arguably going to be for, let's call it like a plus 12. This is like your weekly key. Oh my god, if you weren't a good tank player, you would just evaporate. And there's nothing your healer could do for you this season. Tanks were weak in the War Within Season 1 because they made the philosophy change. Yeah, I've actually heard more often than anything since I started making YouTube vids. You know what I've heard the most? Grim Batol actually gave people so much anxiety as a tank that they stopped playing the game. This is the dungeon that made people transition to healing. A lot of tank players were like, all right, I'm not tanking anymore after this. It was actually that bad. And the reason is, this is the most randomly weird mechanic as well. People got it wrong. People thought that it was because there were a lot of tank busters. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that super randomly, every mob in this dungeon white hit melee swing you for half your health bar. The weirdest way to challenge tanks. Super, super weird and strange. But one of the problems with this dungeon is the amount of physical damage you took, not just all of the other problems with it, which included the first area, the Rive and the Brutal Strikes, which included the fact that there were swirlies and this and this and that, which included the fact that in the second area you had the slashes that you had to deal with, which included the fact in the third area there was the Enforcers. The first boss would overlap you, and for some reason the AoE shout wasn't reduced by armor, so it would really hurt tanks as well. And there was a bleed on you, which, by the way, you dealt with in higher keys by rotating Bubble, Dwarf, and an Earth Elemental, which would take the bleed. On the second boss, you had a random, not bug, in interaction, because it stayed, where after he swapped to his mace, he would swing at you 3 times. If you don't know why you died randomly on the second boss, it's not that his melee hit really hard. It's that he would randomly swing 2 to 3 times after he swapped his weapon. It's like he had a delay, and then he made up for the delay by going boom, boom. Random. Like, why did that happen? We don't know. The third area, there were the mobs that they had the enrage effect, and they would just own you real quick, on top of the slashes, on top of this, on top of the curse to spell. The third boss, you tanked in a cubby. Your point of view as a tank was ridiculous in the third boss. You remember that? Yep. You had the cubby strat, and they never fixed it. So you just dragged the boss, and you just planted yourself. Like, everybody else was actually fighting the boss, and you were fighting a pixel. You remember that? Yeah. And then at the end of that, after that, there was another pull with 2 of the dots that you had to deal with. And after that, there were the little mobs that, do you remember they synced their melee? And not only that, but they could crit. And one of the ways that they helped tune Grim Batol toward the end was that they stopped the little mobs from critting. There were some tanks that would actually just walk in to the last pull with full defensives and evaporate before the last boss because those guys would crit and they just reduced it by like 60% toward the end of the season. This was not a fun dungeon to tank. It's an example of anti-fun gameplay. There weren't really any fun pulls, okay? Yeah, the first time you saw me tanking the Cubby, it was life-changing as a DPS. Thank your tank players. Yeah. This is an example of a dungeon where if you had a tank who was willing to tank your Grim Batol, you thank them. This is add them to your friends list. This dungeon, I don't think there was a single dungeon that was as bad as this one. There are other dungeons I see some problems with, but God, this was the worst dungeon to tank. All the reasons I just mentioned, and there's even more that I didn't. So from a tank perspective, this dungeon was really tough. And from a healer perspective, it's not fun when your tank die either. Like if your tanks are gonna die, it's not fun from a healer perspective either, because you can't save them. There's nothing you can do, and that doesn't feel rewarding as gameplay. There's like you can external them before you think they might die, but yeah, anti-fun gameplay experience. Okay, so that being said, I don't think I could put anything in the same category as this. Like this is pretty low. At least other dungeons that I might think are kind of bad have some redeeming quality. I'm trying to think about what the next one is. The next one would be in C tier. And I'm looking at the dungeon choices here. We have a few very strong potential contenders. I think that in Season 1, how bad was Stone Vault? I feel like Stone Vault, maybe this is again more of a tank and a healer perspective, but Stone Vault was a nightmare dungeon, man. Stone Vault goes in C. Here's why. One of the problems again with Stone Vault is that from a tank perspective, it's not just that there were random amounts of tank busters, okay? The problem was, again, the mobs would sync on you, which is a mechanic that a lot of tanks don't know about, and you only learn this by dying. Like you walk in and you're like, everything hit me within 0.2 seconds, and you're just gone. And this was one of the problems, right? The first hallway, as you walked through to group it, you had to know to pre-defensive this. The second hallway, I think for tanks, the second hallway was like okay, as in for everybody else it sucked. But the second hallway, outside of the dispel requirement, outside of the big AoE damage from the diffusers, etc., the Shadow Claw was nerfed toward the end of the season, but originally they used to just absolutely clap you. The only way to live on a Paladin was to pre-Word of Glory for 100% spell block. You had to try to spell block it. Or rotate. But that even wasn't the worst thing. I think it was the hallway before the fire boss. You remember that? Before the little duo boss, those guys would just apply the stacking thing. But it wasn't just that you had to go and kite them. That was actually a kiting scenario. It was specifically the fact that they all synced on you when you walked in. So the amount of tanks that were literally there one moment and gone the next was an incredible amount because it's not an intuitive tank mechanic. Like, it's really, really bad dungeon design when that happens because tanks have no way to learn this. There's actually no resource that tells you, hey, by the way, that pack right there, all 5 of these guys melee really hard and they melee you at the same time. So you need to be careful with how you pull it. You need to walk to the right or the left, and you just bam, done. Gone, evaporated. So from a tank perspective, Stone Vault, again, just one of those you have to be on, you have to be focused, you can't miss a global, every single pack is danger, you never get a break until like maybe the end. But like even the end, they had the bolts that you had to either kick one or have a plan for it. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. The amount of times that tanks would just go from 100 to 0, in particular, it was a prop pally season 2, and a lot of prop pallies didn't know how to like pre-mitigate. So there was an issue with that, but it definitely, on one hand, it's a challenge, and I understand why people would say, oh, a lot of these things that I'm ranking low, they were learning experiences. But man, for the average player, it was too much. It was too much, man. Like, it's good to challenge you, but challenge you in a fair way. Challenge you with a tank buster or something that happens maybe on a 20-second cooldown, like maximum. if not like a 30 or 40. Like, there are ways to challenge tanks which are interesting and fun. How can you group these polls that you're supposed to group? How can you there are ways to challenge tanks that actually make it rewarding. Getting 100 to 0 is not rewarding. Like, it's not fun. If there's like one or two mechanics like that, or one poll that you really have to lock in, that's fine. But I don't like this. All the dungeons I'm going to put here, you have to understand, I don't like this. Okay, I got a game. I can't talk right now. I got a game. That mentality, I just need a break from that when I'm tanking. So, like, I want to be, like, locked in. I'll be like, okay, hard pull done. And I'm sitting back in my chair and I'm relaxing. Stone Vault Grim Batol did not give me that. Next dungeon that goes in C is definitely City of Threads. City of Threads, both from a tank and healer perspective. The one redeeming quality for City of Threads is that I actually really liked, as a tank player, I liked the area after second boss. That was reasonably hard. I did not feel as though it was unfair. I felt it was a flex of my tank skill to be able to do a big pull there, understand when to kite, and how that worked. Because they applied a debuff that I might be able to parry, and I actually had to do this. Time to give terrible takes. So I definitely think that my opinion on City of Threads is probably colored more by the fact that I also healed. Because tanking this was like, I mean, the first boss was pretty toxic to tank. It was just not, it was very, very on top of it. But City of Threads goes here. Okay. The main reason, by the way, that Stone Vault has to be the lowest of C, borderline unsalted, was Skarmorak. I gotta give one more thought about Stone Vault, okay? Skarmorak. Never have I thought my DPS had less IQ than that boss. It's not a hard boss. You remember Skarmorak with the shards? Spawns 3 crystals. It's not that hard. All you have to do is single target for like 2 seconds. No, 0.5 seconds. The crystals don't have a lot of health, man. They don't. It's pretty simple. Here's what you do. There are these 3 ads that spawn, and you kill one of them. And then you wait a second. And then you kill a different one. And then you wait a second. And then you kill a different one. That's not that bad. And then you get a damage amp. Oh, there's a damage amp. Why is it that I actually started developing a party chat macro for this boss. Before I entered this boss, it was my golden rule to type in party chat, please don't zug zug. I would say this every time. You can go back to my stream and watch it happen. Every time before Skarmorak, please don't zug zug. It was a heartfelt message from the bottom of my heart. I just wanted them not to zug zug. And you know what happened? 95% of the time, they zug zugged. And we would wipe. Annoying boss. And there was nothing I could do. Like, as a tank player, I could even hold my cooldowns. I could even just, like, not send a shield or not send anything. Man, they zug-zugged. All 3 at once. It started getting to the point where I would pre-defensive. It started getting to the point that I would actually straight up defensive sack and spell ward, not during the shield, but just straight up for the shards because I knew it was going to happen. It just was so common. Again, if you played very high keys and you were on a coordinated team, you're like, Skarmorak wasn't that bad. You just had your Frosty K kill the shield. And I'm just like, that's not my experience in Pugs. Actually, it's true. Once you got to a certain key level, Stone Vault became way easier. As funny as that sounds, when your tank was really gaming and you had strats for the first boss and Skarmorak and everything, then it wasn't that bad. But the truth is, early on in Pugs, this was just a really, really, really anti-pug friendly dungeon. Okay, City of Threads. From a tank perspective, first boss, Subjugate, wasn't like the worst thing in the world, to be honest. I think the tank mechanics were pretty fair, except for the third boss. The third boss wasn't fair because the tank was weirdly expected to soak too many of the healing absorbs and could actually go as a prop pally. But in coordinated groups, you would just assign the soaks to immunities. So City of Threads' third boss wasn't that bad when you could just Turtle 1, AMS 1, etc., etc. But in Pugs, man, that third boss was so hard. You were expected to just out-heal it somehow. And that's actually not your job. Like, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. The third boss, City of Threads, was really tough. Second boss, also people didn't know when to use defensives, and it was just high movement, high this, on top of massive damage. No one helped you. I think that the City of Threads had a lot of issues that, again, just made it very kind of anti-pug friendly. The failure rate of City was really, really tough. Also, I will point out that I hadn't upgraded my computer nor my monitor. And it turns out that the first boss of City of Threads, you know the balls that would spawn as they shot out at you? Do you know that they had directional models? Because I didn't. This is a hilarious thing that I did not know. My graphics were set so low that to me, I just had to guess every single time. It was rather infamous that I would die to this mechanic. And it turns out that I just couldn't see them. Like, it turns out that I actually just could not see them on my screen, but they did have directional eye, like you could tell where they were going, and I just couldn't see them. I agree. So I played Guardian Druid a lot this season as well as Prot Pally, and Guardian Druid was weirdly good at a lot of these mechanics, to be fair. Prot Pally with Spell Block, way too easy. First boss with Spell Block was like, maybe not easy, but comparatively to how other tanks had to game that Subjugate on first boss was really tough. A lot of tanks also didn't know that it was half magic, half physical, so they would drop their physical DR, like Iron Fur, for example, on Bear. You have to pool Rage and have a DR on top of it. Subjugate was just a little bit too frequent, I think, for City of Threads. I think that was a real big issue with it. All right, moving on. We definitely got to put a few more things in Siege here. I'm looking. To me, right away, when I was thinking about the dungeons that I never want to repeat, these are all there. I don't see a redeeming quality for Grim Batol, Stone Vault, or City of Threads. There's no pull where I'm just like, man, I'm so excited for this, except maybe the pull after second boss. But there's no real moment where I'm like, man, this is a great dungeon. Okay, the next one I have here is definitely a controversial take. But I hated this dungeon. This one, I could hear an argument that I'm wrong about this. Okay? But this dungeon rubbed me the wrong way. I hated healing it. I definitely hated tanking it. Siege of Boralus. Not as bad as Stone Vault or City of Threads. The last boss in particular, really anti-fun. The fact that the boss before that, I mean, there was just... the real big offenders for Boralus was not really the first part. It was actually the bananas. The bananas drove me crazy because they're not a mechanic until they are a mechanic. They're not a mechanic until you're tanking it and you run into one and then you can't block for 2 seconds. So the bananas, they were just such an annoying RP type mechanic that they put these bananas out because they're monkeys, and I get it. But I really hated the mechanics in that area of the dungeon. The main offender here is the last boss and the second boss. So I don't like the second boss. From a healing perspective, it wasn't that bad. But once again, I play the game with 200 plus ping. So bosses like the second boss, where occasionally when they have area denial, it's technically not that hard, but they hadn't introduced the nice swirly effect. So it was really hard to see the swirlies on the second boss, and it just felt kind of bad to do this whole dungeon, okay? When it's just like, you get in there, and then the swirlies happen, and you just get hit by one and you lose the run. Very frequently, you would have at least one death to that. And it's not a hard mechanic, but it rubbed me the wrong way. The main thing was the last boss. That boss was just so weirdly designed. The fact, because you know how that dot works on the last boss? Again, a little bit of a higher key thing, but even in mid-level keys, that boss was terrible because people didn't... In higher level keys, things are a problem because they're hard. In mid-level keys, like a 12 or a weekly key, it's hard because it's just people don't help you. And if anything ever requires, if you say, well, your DPS use defensives, that's not going to happen. So this dungeon, last boss... Oof. So the way that the dot damage is calculated is when it actually comes out of the boss, that's how much damage it's going to do to you, which is kind of lame. As in, if you see it coming toward you and you defensive, it won't mitigate the damage. So you have to pre-defensive and guess. It was a giant game of reaction time and RNG as a healer. Probably my least favorite boss to heal of the entire. I would rather heal any other boss, I think, than the last boss of Siege of Boralus, because it really was just pray for RNG, pray the tank gets it, bad RNG, healer problem. Your DKA messes it, fantastic, no healer problem. But if you just so happen to get it on your shaman and your heal, like etc., it was just impossible. And when you dispelled, they have to be a split instead of frac. Yeah, there was a lot of. It honestly might just be a visual problem. Like, I think if they updated the visuals in Siege, that dungeon would feel a lot better. But I think Siege goes down here. Okay. I think tanking Siege wasn't as bad as healing it. I think that last boss really rubbed me the wrong way. Because it wasn't HPS, man. Yeah, they would run ahead of you. They didn't wait. They didn't know. It was... Yeah. And the fact it was different in BFA. But yeah. Okay. So that's my argument for Siege. Next dungeon that goes down here is definitely Priory. Priory, I can't rank higher. But I have takes on Priory, okay? Priory is not a bad dungeon. It's just hard. I genuinely don't think Priory is a bad dungeon. If anything, I'm willing to put Priory in B. Except that I can't. Because if this tier list is being made for what I would play in a weekly key, like this is like basically like not at a plus 20, but just kind of like, hey, I'm on an alt, I'm just trying to get a key done, maybe like a 12 or like a 15, somewhere in that range. God, I'm not pugging Priory. There's zero shot IQ into a Priory for a weekly key. It's not going to happen. Priory's down here. You're not doing it right. Like maybe this you could do a weekly key on, but you're not doing this key. If you had a choice right now on retail and you're like, I want to do a key, I just want a quick 12. You're not doing. Priory is the dungeon you're avoiding. Yeah, I actually like healing the Paladin pull too, because it's an example of as long as my tank doesn't overpull and there's only one caster, and probably we get those kicks maybe with one caster. Priory is an example. There's actually a lot of fun HPS checks. The mini boss is an example of a fun HPS check. Like, wow, this is really hard, but I just got to pump healing. Healing is fun. Healing isn't fun when kicks go off, because then you can't heal and it becomes a battle of externals and defensives. That's not fun. First pull of Priory is a little anti-fun because it's not really an HPS check. It's a, did you see that this mechanic was on you check? And I don't love that. But the problem with Priory is simply that it requires you to pay attention. And if there's one thing I have learned from a both tank and healer perspective, it's that the chances my team is paying attention is incredibly low. So, you know, Priory is a tough one because my team doesn't help me. If they do, it's actually not that bad of a dungeon. It's just hard. Hard is not bad though. Yeah. Because the one thing that Priory taught me more than any other dungeon actually is that people did not have, my DPS are not looking at party frames. Exactly. That's the one thing Priory taught me because, wow, people don't look at party frames, dude. They don't. Their DPS have literally zero clue that there are two casts on them. And then they die, and then they go, question mark? And I'm like, what do you mean question mark? There were two casts on you, dude. And they go, what, really? And I'm like, you didn't see that? And actually, this dungeon, more than anything, really encouraged me to give people the weak aura that told them, there are two casts on you, please use a defensive. That's when, like, people would walk into one of the caster pulls and full defensive right away. And you're like, that's not, you don't, there's no damage happening yet. I'm talking about like the pull when we went left side, there was a pull with the caster pull there. There's no damage happening. You only defensive if there's a cast on you, but people would get scared, and so they would defensive early, and there was no cast on them. They would just see it go off, but they didn't have like an actual thing to tell them. And I think that was kind of bleh. So this was an example of where weak auras actually really did help. And you know that Priory is still in the dungeon pool for pre-patch, and everybody's losing their kick, right? Like, you have healers lose their kick, and January 20th, mark my words, you're going to walk into Priory, and it's going to be a hilarious experience. Post-defensive tuning, post-healer kick, pre-patch, you still have to play this dungeon for like a month and a half. How? This isn't... This is an example of a dungeon where it's like, what are you supposed to? Yeah, your Resto Shaman kicks on a 30-second cooldown. How are you gonna do? How are you doing the first boss? Yeah, there's a lot of potential for ninja pulls. I will say the problem with this dungeon is not the paladin pull. People quote that all the time. The truth is that that's a time for me to flex as a healer because the paladin pull until, I mean, right now it's got to be something like a plus 20 max item level. I bet you it's around 19 or 20. The paladin pull, Sacred Toll, does not one tap a DPS who is geared. As long as you're not under geared, you don't have to defensive it, but you will drop to 10% HP. They are force desynced. I do have time to heal you. The question is actually, can I, as a healer, somehow bounce your health bar back up repeatedly within a second? That's actually not necessarily anti-fun gameplay, and it's a challenge, although hopefully they use defensives to make my job easier, right? But that's first boss. I don't know why they buffed it this season. It weirdly feels harder to do Priory in Season 3 than it did in Season 2, which is super strange. Very weird feeling that the Priory feels harder this season instead of easier. Like it should be easier, but it's weirdly the first boss with the AoE spear thing. They didn't have to put that in, man. Yeah. Okay. So, are there any other C tier dungeons? I'm trying to think here. There's a few that I want to put in here. I'm thinking something like Theater of Pain. Theater of Pain had a few redeeming qualities, but Zavwing really tanked it. No, I don't agree with that one. Random, I think. No, well, because weekly key-wise, Rookery wasn't. I think Theater of Pain, the Zavwing... How did they leave the third mini-boss that bad for so long? You skipped it even in a 10, right? Like, I remember even in, like, a weekly key, you would skip the last mini-boss. You guys don't think Theater is actually in C tier? But what was redeeming on Theater of Pain? I can't think of what was, like... What was that moment? Maybe the first boss with the big pull? What was that moment that you felt good? Do you want to do Theater of Pain again? Let me phrase it this way, because there are different perspectives here for sure. From a tank and healer, I can't think of anything that was super crazy egregious. The first boss was a healing check, but it was kind of fair. But 5 bosses, the Zavwing just being not very big pulls, there weren't a lot of redeeming qualities for Theater of Pain, except for the first pull was kind of fun. But maybe if you told me that Theater of Pain is in the same category as Priory, I would argue that it's at least one better than this, simply because it wasn't as hard. Because there were less wipe scenarios, to be fair. So if you were going to rank it in that perspective, I would say I would much rather do a weekly Theater of Pain than I would a weekly Priory. By that perspective, I put it in B. If I was going to queue for a 10, I don't know. I mean, Theater of Pain, I lost a lot of Theater of Pains and Pugs. I'm okay with B, but there was a lot of random. Gore Chop people would get hit by the chains, although technically in a lower key level, you could out-heal it. Zavwing is probably the thing that really brings this dungeon down, dude. Yeah. All mobs, those drops, there was a lot of stuff. I feel like the PvP mechanic for Zav... The one thing I will say is I did play a little DPS this season. And it is so crazy how quickly your competitive spirit ignites the second you do the Zav fight as a DPS player. It is hilarious. You go from, we're going to succeed. We're a group of 5 people. We're fighting this dungeon together. My tank's gaming, my healer's gaming, we're doing good damage. The second they put me against another player, it's me versus them. I will pop every single defensive, health potion, CCs, stun. You are not winning that PvP duel. It brought out the most toxic behavior from me personally, and as well as everyone else. The second they put me in a PvP duel in the middle of a Mythic Plus dungeon, I completely forgot about the Mythic Plus dungeon. I'm there to win. It was so weird. It was like my little moment where I was like, oh, I'm a DPS player. And there were many times where I was like, health potion. I will say, I was that guy for what it's worth. Not in like a competitive key level, but God, it really did. It was 0 point to it. It's not what you're supposed to do, but it was pretty funny. So maybe by that alone, the memes of that boss. I will say, yeah, I will say that's not a good redeeming quality. That's more it brought out the worst in me. uh, do you remember that there was a toy dagger? There was a high tech for keys, high key tech. There was a toy that would reduce your health to 1 and you would insta the duel. Fun fact. If you didn't, that was not a thing that was very commonly known, but there was a toy that would reduce your health to 1. High keys started getting to the point where people would say before the key started, you got dagger? Do you have the dagger that would do this? Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking Theater of Pain is in B, that's fine. Okay. Obviously, one of the problems, very linear dungeon. Not a lot of routing decisions, actually. But it doesn't feel as bad as these. Okay, next thing. Same deal. I want to put Workshop. The third boss of Workshop nearly lands it in Unsalted Beans. Cujo was not fun either, but this dungeon can't be ranked as low. But the third boss has got to be one of the worst Mythic Plus bosses ever. The gears, there was nothing I liked more than spending 20 minutes in a dungeon to walk into the third boss, try to pull a pack on the third boss, and immediately die. Because somebody got hit by a gear. And it one-tapped them. So, Workshop, it has redeeming qualities in terms of the fact, first pull, even if a bomb went off, you could out-heal it. 2 bombs go off, potentially. I think that a lot of times in like a 10 or a 12, you would actually split the first pull. In higher keys, you just kind of made it work. There were a lot of times where that first pull would go poorly. I think that a lot of times people didn't understand the dogs in the second area. But I can't say that anything, I wasn't like crazy stressed as a healer in this dungeon. There were a lot of really big checks for both tanks and healers, mostly the healer. But the skip fails definitely were not fun. And the lack of awareness for helping your healer on the dogs with the dispel profile, anything that as a healer when I have to just react faster. So I would put this in B. If it didn't have the skip fails, which were classic, the gear problem. The problem with the gear thing was that wasn't a healer check. That was just, you just died. At I feel like it was like a 15 or like a 16. Like it wasn't that high of a key level where the gear on the third boss, you get hit by it, boom, key's over. You hopefully get there with like 3 B reses. And obviously, okay, something that was the biggest nothing burger of all time. Can I tell you what was, however? This really annoyed me. Do you remember when they changed the line of sight thing on Cujo? The second boss, they changed the corner box. And all of a sudden, all the podcasters, you heard the bench, the potty C, and every high key player was like, this is the worst change ever. I can't believe I have to line of sight on the second boss now. Tanks didn't know how to do that on a 12 to begin with. In your weekly key, you were line of sighting anyways. That was actually such a high key problem that it didn't affect like the vast majority of players. Because if your tank was trying to line of sight this boss, they were failing it. Almost certainly. Like maybe you got lucky and you had a tank that was like really good, but you actually had to position him to get the corner right. Your tank would try, but they would fail. It's really weird. And the line of sight is not a good mechanic. I'm not arguing it was a good mechanic. I'm just saying that you actually did have to know how to bring the boss perfectly in line to get the line of sight properly. What would happen is your tank would try to do it, but your DPS couldn't hit the boss anyways. You would just line of sight regardless. So that change, I remember it being like massive drama. They talked about it for like a long time. They were like, this is the most unfun. It was like, dude, that happened in a 12. Anyway, so on a weekly key, I don't think that changed that much. Okay. I don't think there's much more to talk about. Honorable mention to all the demon hunters that would hunt off the last boss and brick keys. That was pretty funny, actually. As a range, I was line of sighting every time in there. So there was a mechanic in this dungeon, Lacouse. What was supposed to happen in higher keys, actually, what was supposed to happen is you didn't actually have damage downtime. Because as a range and a DPS, if your tank positioned the boss perfectly, the second boss, you could full cast and heal. Like, you never line of sighted to dodge the AoE mechanic. When you had to hide behind the box, you never line of sight. Yeah, exactly. Like, you were supposed to DPS during that. But oftentimes there was like a very specific spot, and it was pretty annoying as a healer because a lot of times DPS would greet it and they thought they were in the right spot, but they didn't have the weak aura and they would die because you just get one tapped. Never forget the story of when, yeah, that was not intended. Never forget the story of when this happened on the second boss. The tank tried to bring him to a line of spot at 12. Toward the end of the season, I was healing this random ult key, and the tank, 2 people got hit by the AoE. We rezzed them, they got hit by the next one. And the tank let everyone have it. He noticed that my ult had a rank 2 weapon enchant. So he started whispering me, and he was like, first of all, you're a failure as a human being because you couldn't heal that mechanic. I was like, that's not a healer mechanic, dude. Like, they were supposed to line of sight. Like, obviously I can't heal that even on a 12. And he was like, you suck. And I was like, what? I was like, okay, all right, dude. Like, GG's, have a nice day. And then he found me in Dornegal and hounded me, followed me for 10 minutes, and proceeded to flame me in /say. We weren't even in a party. And I didn't ignore him right away because it was almost entertaining. And then he found my stream and came into my stream and started yelling at me and like, he said some really nasty things because my 2 DPS failed that mechanic. And it was his 12. Wild coincidence that happened. Real story. Some WoW players are incredibly toxic. And that was at the end of a season, by the way. This is like we were doing whatever it was already at that point, like 18, something. We were doing much higher than that. So it was pretty wild that happened. I remember this. Okay, so that's that. We got to keep going. We're not going to take as long for all these dungeons because we're not going to spend crazy long here. I think there's a lot of redeeming qualities about many of these other things. I'm trying to think about this. Mists of Tir Scythe, genuinely, when they brought it back, they could have made it much better. They arbitrarily nerfed this. They nerfed their own success on this dungeon. If they didn't add the last area mechanic and the random anima slash in the maze, this dungeon would have been much better. Like, actually, the dungeon design was fine. But honestly, Can you think about how much more fun this dungeon would have been if the guys in the maze didn't RNG anima slash your tank and he had to fight for his life depending completely on RNG which maze you got. And on top of that, you didn't have the random AoE blast on the last boss, the last area, and you could just pull big. Like, yeah, I don't know why they felt like they had to buff it. I genuinely think if they just left it kind of like it was in Shadowlands, it would have been easier. Maybe they were worried it would be like a Shadow Moon's Burial Grounds where it was too easy. But, like, yeah, I feel like this could have been a banger, and I might have to put this... I don't know. I didn't mind doing weekly Mistkey. That's not true. If I think about it in terms of would I rather do a Mists of Tir Scythe or a Priory, like, clearly that's not a comparison. Okay, looking. Dawnbreaker, B tier. Dawnbreaker can't be higher than B. Dawnbreaker is definitely B. Also, somehow they made it worse when they brought it back. I don't know how this was possible. Also, I don't know why people voted for it. They literally handed it to the player base. B for bugged. No, B for bad too. There's no real fun pull in Dawnbreaker. There's no rewarding aspect. What do you like about Dawnbreaker? Not what do you dislike. What do you like about it? At least this pull had a big lust pull. At least there was a few things. What was this? What was the most fun? What was the good part about Dawnbreaker? I'm waiting. Did you have like was there any fun pull in here that you were like, yeah? What was there? Short 3 boss dungeon. It's not a short dungeon timer if you die. So the problem is that I can't come up with a reason to rank it higher. It kind of just Yeah, and it was bugged. Yeah, you get it. Well, you get to leave early when you wipe on all of the different areas that you could wipe on. Okay, so the problem in Season 1 is that it was very RNG for tank hits. The Umbral Rush was insane, and then they changed it to be the Necrotic Healing Absorb, the Shadow Blades. I don't know how they made this dungeon worse in Season 3. I think the first boss was the biggest offender. It's technically doable, and it's not like the worst thing in the world, but that first boss was pretty nasty when they brought it back. Yeah. Well, the Tank Buster was worse in Season 1. But yeah, maybe it's just that I'm a Guardian Druid player. From a tank perspective, Guardian Druids have to fight for their damn life on these Shadow Blades. First boss was tough as a tank originally in Season 1 because you needed such frequent and very, very structured defensive usage because the blast would hurt you that bad and the rest of their team was chilling. But then they changed it so that the tanks weren't fighting, but now the healer had to fight for the first boss. Second boss, they never nerfed at all. Third boss, I think the coolest thing about Dawnbreaker is the fact that as you got better and better at the key, people did realize that the cast on the last boss didn't scale. And I'm not going to lie, as a unique mechanic, it was pretty cool that during the RP, you would go fight a pack. I think that's pretty cool, actually. Just as like a random, like dragon riding, as the last boss was going, instead of waiting for the RP, even at a reasonable key level, you would actually go fight a pack. This didn't happen at 12s. People would just fly to the boss. But I think I saw it in 15s. Like I saw, if you go play this dungeon, I think that you can see it at even a reasonable key level that people will fight a pack during that RP. I think that's kind of cool. But Twitch healing is not fun. As in, like, you're like the variability on healing this dungeon, depending on whether people are getting kicks or whether people are helping you, is pretty massive. So, not a huge fan of Dawnbreaker. There's just not a lot of redeeming qualities. There's actually more redeeming qualities about these other dungeons, but I'll keep Dawnbreaker in B. I at least think it's not the worst key. 3 bosses is correct. I don't know why people voted it back. The only people who voted this back were DPS players, 100%. Tank and healer players did not vote Dawnbreaker back. It was never fun to tank or heal this place. And then it was like a super DPS take, in my opinion, that they brought it back. This is one of those, there are more DPS players than there are tanks and healers. People definitely voted it because it's 3 bosses. But 3 boss dungeons aren't necessarily better. Okay. Looking. We have Ara-Kara, which we have to rank both in Season 1 and when it came back. Yeah, Dawnbreaker was I don't think it's a good weekly key now. If I was queuing into a weekly key right now, what dungeon would I actually want to do is a good question. It's a good question, actually. There shouldn't be any Durnesser. I'm sorry. All right, let me think about this. No, Gambit. We have to rank Gambit a little higher. Gambit's a good weekly key. Ecodome. Oh, Ecodome's not on here. Ecodome is missing from this list. Yeah, Ecodome or Gambit are probably the 2 best weekly keys. Dragon Boss on Gambit and Last Boss can be a little bit but Ecodome is a little bit more friendly, I think, where you just kind of smash it. If you get past the first part, you'll kind of go to the end, though. Okay. Dawnbreaker, I understand that the bugs were so bad that you could rank it like this, but actually, Dawnbreaker and Grim Batol, they couldn't be in the same category. If you had to tell me, hey, you could do a Dawnbreaker or a Grim Batol, clearly I'm doing Dawnbreaker. There's no way I would do Grim Batol over this. Funny enough, they both have cursed spells, but Next dungeon. Rookery. Rookery, I have a unique take. In higher keys, Rookery was bad. Very bad. This dungeon scaled not so good. It was very weird, but actually, in average weekly keys, not that bad. It was genuinely not that bad. Right. That is actually, and we are ranking this, I said at the beginning, it's more for like the 12 to 15 range. Once you got to a 19 or like an 18, man, that last boss was anti-fun behavior. But in a 12, you didn't really notice it. Like, honestly, in a 12, you didn't really think about the last boss that much. You would miss a lot of times in my keys as a healer, you would miss the mechanic. As in, people would not take their circle to the thing, and they would miss it, but you could out-heal it. Whereas, and the shield on the last boss did actually get broken at a decent pace Whereas as the key levels got higher, if you didn't coordinate cooldowns, that thing was just impossible. It would literally, you would get to the end with like 7 minutes and fail to timer. Like that last boss was a pretty not fun. Maybe I played Preservation Evoker as well, so I was really not having fun. Like I really didn't have fun because the range on the last boss, any boss that's just like super spread out, I get that visually he's super cool, but it's not fun gameplay when people are out of range. I think I put Rookery, honestly, I put Rookery top of B. But just as a weekly key, I think Rookery was A because there weren't that many wipe scenarios. People getting hit by the beam first boss, people standing in swirly second boss, third boss just not doing the mechanic. But like there really weren't as many wipe scenarios in this key. I think that on average I completed more Rookeries out of 12 than I did something else. So Rookery, I'm kind of okay with. Not the end of the world. Just a mid dungeon. Frontals from the first pack as a hilarious example, but you would release and just keep going. Like you would die, somebody would die to the frontal for sure, but then they would just, because the release point was right there, and you have to factor that in. Right. It wasn't like a wipe scenario, whereas a lot of these dungeons, I mean, there was no recovering it. Like if you remember City of Threads, if you died to the pack, like say you got hit by one of the orbs before the first boss, bro, you spawned like way back over here and there was a skip and now you can't get back and you have to wait a minute. That's not fun behavior, you know? This isn't about necessarily how hard the dungeons are. Just from a tanking and healing perspective, by the end of this list, I'm going to glance over it again. And I'm pretty sure if you told me, hey, you could tank a 12 Rookery or a 12 Grim Batol with a completely random group, what would you rather do? Tanking this was the only thing about the Siege of Boralus I'm looking, not the worst to tank, but then if you told me I could heal a Siege of Boralus, I just don't like this dungeon. There's so many random things, specifically, like I said, the last boss. Okay, that being said, weekly keys. This one's higher. This one's higher than you think it is for weekly key. For higher key, it had massive problems. For weekly key, the hook is a really bad mechanic. God, the hook. Oh. The more I think about it, the more I realize that Surgeon Stitchflesh might be one of the worst pug bosses ever designed. I mean, it wasn't that abnormal that people would miss the hook on Necrotic Wake, third boss. It really wasn't that abnormal. Yeah. The thing is, I think this dungeon is fun. Like, big first pull, big pulls, in general. I felt pretty clean with it. Like, it wasn't that hard, but it was toward the end of the dungeon that it was kind of unfun. But I don't think it killed weekly keys as much. I mean, I don't know, man. I was in some weekly keys where they had missed 3 hooks in a row and it was gone. Especially when the weapons were such a big deal, even at a 10 or a 12. But, like, no, I mean, you could miss, like, 1 maybe in game as a healer. But then the crimes of Necrotic Wake really started to happen at a higher key level where, yeah, if you wasted your weapons, there was no recovering. The last boss in particular, I played Evoker, and it was just not. When they changed it to try to help people, do you remember the last boss? They changed it so they were like, oh, hey, if the Evoker gets sent down, there's literally nothing they could do. What I would do, I remember I would save like combat potion, I would save a trinket even, but basically I was like tip the scales, double empower, Ebon Might for myself, prescience myself, and I literally couldn't kill the ad downstairs at a certain key level, so you would just die. You could try to Wernstone tech it, but that was hard to do. Positioning was pretty strict. You literally couldn't kill the ad. So then they changed it, and they were like, no problem. We understand that we fucked up by introducing Augmentation Evoker into World of Warcraft's ecosystem. Evoker no longer gets sent down. Worst change ever. At least you could B-res the Evoker. You can't B-res your entire dungeon group. Literally worst. I don't know why they did that. Very bad change. Incredibly bad change. Because that boss went from hard to really hard. So do you remember what happened? Aug Evoker now stays up. But half of Aug's damage went down. So now you had one DPS and an Aug Evoker and a shield. And the only way to do it at a higher key level was to mind control and add and time the cleaver into the shield. Now, this didn't happen at a weekly key, but you honestly, you really did carry a mind controlled add. You did the same thing in Mist, but it wasn't as bad. Oh, the more I think about it, the more trauma I have about the second boss too. No one kicked. You would waste all your orbs on previous things. The weapons were not fun back when they brought it back. It was more fun in Shadowlands when you had the Goliath orb and you could feel the power. I don't know. There were some pretty fun pulls. There was a lot of tech about this dungeon where it was such a different experience at like a 12, a 15, and an 18. Like, it was just such a massively different experience. I'm trying to think as a tank. As a tank, you had to game. There was a lot of things that happened here as a tank. All right, my personal experience, I'm going to send it. I'm going to arbitrarily send it. Actually, Necrotic Wake is A. I enjoyed this dungeon. When it comes down to pure enjoyment, I would rather tank a Necrotic Wake than I would a Rookery. It was a fun dungeon. It was a fun dungeon. At the end of the day, although it has all the problems I just mentioned, and there was like the doom of maybe missing the last few bosses, I think it was fun. You had big pulls. You felt like you were gaming. There were things that were, yeah. Honestly, it was a good dungeon. I would play it again. If Necrotic Wake was brought back, I wouldn't be upset. If this was brought back in the new season, I wouldn't be upset. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, let's think about some more A-tier dungeons. Dark Flame Cleft, A-tier. Borderline, a really good dungeon, actually. Genuinely, a very well-designed dungeon, except for the third mechanic, the minecart. Come on, dude. That one really makes me so upset, because actually, if they didn't have the minecart mechanic, which was fun for no one, probably S-tier dungeon, actually. I'm trying to think about this. From a tank perspective, there were some things to worry about, big pull. From a healer perspective, the Candle King was enjoyable, it was fun. It wasn't, I mean, there was a certain point where it was really hard without defenses and stuff. Yeah. But the minecart mechanic, also the last boss, just not fun, but not that hard once you figured it out. The minecart was just such a problem. 99% reduced damage and healing in the darkness. I get that RP-wise is kind of cool, but not really. I don't know, man. Them leaving that in for Mythic Plus was a mistake. They could have just disabled it. They could have left it in for like Mythic 0, and then just once Mythic Plus starts... Because what you would do in a higher key is you would still gather all of it, and there were still tanks in a 12 who would try to do that too, and then they would wipe the group. I have to leave it an A just for that. Can you judge something based off of the sin of one mechanic? I mean, can one thing really ruin a dungeon like this? I think so. I don't know. If this isn't S tier, what is S tier though? Like, if this isn't Cheesecake, what is Cheesecake? I'll put Dark Flame Cleft around Necrotic Wake. I'm okay with that. Fair enough. It can't be with the minecart mechanic. All right, reasonable. Okay, other dungeons. Halls of Atonement. Okay, I have a funny take about this, because on beta, it was absolutely terrible. But actually, when they fixed it, kind of a banger dungeon. Yeah, that's what I was thinking random. I was thinking that too, actually. Not the worst dungeon in the world. Halls of Atonement, right now. The Pug experience, they fixed it, a lot of it. I think that when it first came out, the extra casters and the obliterators were insane. As a Pug, people definitely get hit by the first boss. People definitely fail the second boss. Third boss, Lanterns. I've actually generally found that people do the third boss right. I think 12... Yeah, I feel like in a 12, I've mostly seen... people do Halls of Atonement correctly comparatively to something like Priory. Would you really rather do Priory? Yeah, because like if it was overtuned, it would be too hard. But I actually think Halls on a weekly key, I'm not against Halls on a weekly key. You would really rather do Priory over Halls of Atonement? Really? Really? Hmm. In your experience, Halls is actually that bad. Okay, this might be a little different for me. Maybe as a tank, I know how to carry Halls of Atonement. Like, I know exactly how to pull this, where it's really not that bad. Like, I like tanking Halls because I know how to do it for my group. Like, I know how to say, I'm going to split this, I'm going to combine this, I'm going to go fast here, I'm going to go slow here, because I can see whether my group is getting kicks, how we're doing based on the first pull. I'm like, okay, I'm going to slow this down a lot, and I feel like I know how to carry it. I'm going to pull extra funnel on the first boss. I'm not pulling any funnel on the first boss, so I can make decisions as a tank in this dungeon, and it doesn't feel overtuned to me where it's like insta-wipe. Because you don't have to do the pull after first boss, for example. You can, but you don't have to. You can split it if you think your group is not that good. And I feel like that's the thing, though. The main thing is that the tank pulls too much in Halls for your pugs. Okay. As a weekly key, you really don't want to do Halls. You guys all have the same experience. It's interesting that basically your tank routes Halls poorly. As a tank player myself, I like Halls of Atonement. As a healer, I don't mind Halls of Atonement. But it's possible that I am not getting the same experience as you guys. So where would you put Halls then? Like B? I mean, so let's say you did 10 to 12. Yeah, like 10 to 12 weekly key. What do you think about Halls? I was going to put it in A. I was going to pull it in A. I feel like it's a good balance of the fact that your tank does get hit, but it's not overtuned. So there are tank mechanics in here, but it's like, you know, personally put Halls in B. B is fair. I'll take B for Halls, but I'll put it in the top of B. Okay, that's fair. I remember there are 3 icons here, and Ecodome is not here. Actually, yeah, I'll have to get Ecodome at the end. That's fine. I think A or B for Halls are both fair. The question is, all right, let me put it this way. Would you rather do Halls or Dawnbreaker? Or maybe Dawnbreaker should be in C. Now that I'm looking at this, I'm like, wait a second. Would I rather do Theater of Pain? I'd rather do Theater of Pain. Well, Rookery or Dawn? I'd rather do Rookery for sure. You would rather do, there's no way you say Dawnbreaker. Halls or Dawnbreaker? You definitely have trauma. You should go to therapy. Holy, you would rather do Halls than Dawnbreaker? I don't think that's a very popular take. I feel like Halls is infinitely better than Dawnbreaker. But would I rather do Necrotic Wake or Dark Flame? Would I rather do Dark Flame Cleft or would I rather do Halls? I'm okay if the fact that Workshop is here. Yeah, I'm okay with Halls and B. That's fine. Okay, we got a few left. The Motherload. Ooh, Motherload. Okay, the skip thing at the beginning was really weird. Jumping over the box and losing 30 seconds to your key because somebody kept missing the jump at the box. That docks points right away. But I can't think of some really... I think the last boss circles, if they added 0.5 seconds to dodging the last boss, I actually feel like that was one of my biggest complaints about the dungeon, is that you had to use a safe spot because the circles on the last boss would just go so fast. But honestly, at the end of the day, Motherload was outplayable. At a weekly key level, if people didn't use defensives on the second boss, you could out-heal it. It was just harder. And kind of the same for everything. There was a lot of checks in this dungeon. There was a lot of tank checks as well. Tanking the big electrocution, like the big dudes, the peacekeepers, I feel like... Yeah, definitely wasn't BFA Motherload. I feel like the problem with Motherload is the fact that I wasn't a Night Elf. And the amount of skips in this dungeon dock points from it at a higher key level. But I mean, in a 12, it was fine. Honestly, a 12 was fine. Yo, the healer tier list, I gotta update both the healer and the tank tier list is still exactly what I said, except maybe Warrior's a little better. But the healer tier list, I'm gonna have to revisit it. Hopefully they add tuning notes soon and we can revisit the healer tier list. I've been playing way more. I've been actually super enjoying healing on Midnight, and I'm playing a lot of healer. I have some different opinions about it. I would say Motherload. I have fond memories of this dungeon. If you told me, again, start ranking it. Would you rather do Motherload or Stone Vault? Definitely Motherload. You would rather, like, what would you rather do? Would you rather do Motherload or Priory? Obviously, I think Motherload is A. I think it belongs here. You don't really, you're not complaining when you get a Motherload 15. Let's say you're trying to push 15s and that's where you're at. If you get a motherload 15, you're not really complaining about this. You're not like, ah, such an unlucky roll. It's actually like you're pretty good with motherload 15. You know what I mean though? Yeah. Necrotic Wake for weekly keys was a little bit tough. If we're talking about that, it's a tough one though. Well, Stone Vault, you missed one. Dude, Stone Vault was... There's so many... I think Skarmorak still... I have trauma about that boss. I cannot express to you that I would literally go in party chat every time we got to the crystal boss here and say, please don't Zug Zug. I straight up... You hear me say it every time, and on stream, it got to the point where we would kill all 3 crystals, and I would just sit there, and instead of going... I wouldn't even get mad. I would just go... Like, it was just like I accepted defeat on this crystal boss. Skarmorak for pugs was the worst. Moa, you like Stone Vault because you were a Frost DK. And Frost DK absolutely owned this dungeon. That's why you liked it. Because you would pull around your Frost DK and you would AMS the Skarmorak. It was the Skarmorak. And then the fear kick on the first pull, etc. So, yeah, for sure. That's why you liked it, because you're a Frost DK. The 100%, that's why. Okay, moving on. So a lot of these, some of them are not ranked in A. I'm not going in order here. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. How do I rank Cinderbrew Meadery? Because in a weird way, this and this are very similar. Cinderbrew and Floodgate are both incredibly similar because they're actually, believe it or not, both of these are kind of good dungeons. This one's a better design dungeon than this. Floodgate's better than Cinderbrew for sure. But it was so hard. Let me think about, because Floodgate first room was good. For Mythic Plus, first pull of the room of Cinderbrew, at a higher key level, really bad. As a healer, super toxic, because if somebody just got throw chair, plus this, but it was a big fun lust pull. There was the one good thing about Cinderbrew. This is a really good example of dungeon design. Do you know why this was actually okay and not ranked in C? Like, not ranked in Unsalted Beans? Because they added a bunch of little mobs that did nothing. And it's a really good example. Just do that more often. People love to pad. An example being, you know the bee hallway? They didn't have to put those little bees in there. They really did almost nothing. They hit the tank a little bit. But there wasn't really... Their big bees shot up. But the little bees, you just felt like you had 8 mobs in a pull instead of 3. You had like 15 mobs. It was actually only 5. But it felt like you had more, and people like doing big damn. So that was a really saving grace for this, is they added a lot of little mobs. And in the first area, too, there was only like 5 mobs that mattered. The big 3 muscles, 1 or 2 things that put a dispel or a cast. The rest of the little mobs were just fodder. They should do that more often. Algathar is another example. First pull of Algathar is renowned for being a huge fun memory. Everyone likes it. Everyone likes it. Except for the fact that it doesn't matter. Like, how fast you kill the little lashers on Algathar doesn't matter. But it's fun, and everybody likes it. I think Cinderbrew B. I'll accept B for this. The only problem with it is I definitely didn't like it as a weekly key. I feel like weekly key-wise, this was not good. Because you did wipe a lot. Like, this did not have a high success rate. And based off of weekly key, tanking was toxic, actually. Tanking and healing this was both of those roles were toxic in this dungeon. IPA was a bad boss. The first pull and some of the hallways were kind of, but the first pull, yeah, pugging that first pull, because I don't know why tanks always, man, this was a really good example of please stop watching the MDI for your weekly plus 12s. This was a perfect example. Please, for the love of God, do not turn on the MDI if you are doing weekly 10s. This was definitely a problem with that. You know, that was one of those scenarios where people saw other people pull really big, and so they pulled really big, and it was just like, if you didn't do that, it wasn't that bad. Everyone in a 3rd and 4th pull before the 2nd. Yeah. And the hallway, I don't know, it had weird tech with the skip and stuff that you kind of had to do at a certain key level. Yeah. But I don't think I could actually see Cinderbrew being C, except for the fact that I still have more fun playing Cinderbrew than I do City of Threads. And the real problem is that, if anything, I should have made an extra tier, and Grim Batol should... You can't put... And this was, like, one of the worst pug experiences that I've ever had, bar none. It just killed my... I mean, it really... I cannot express to you how many comments... I've literally gotten... Not one, not two, but, like, dozens of people when I talk about the state of tanking in all the YouTube vids. There are dozens of people who are like, bro... I stopped tanking because of Grim Batol. Like, I literally, they're like, I refuse to play tank because of this dungeon. Like, this dungeon, never tanked again. That's actually crazy that one dungeon did that to a percentage of the player base. So there's nothing that could be down here. If we're thinking from a tank and healer perspective, cannot be anything worse than this. Yeah. I'll take Cinderbrew and B. I could see an argument for it being C, but I think that it did have redeeming qualities. It did have redeeming qualities, and I would still rather do this than this. Yeah. Okay, all right, moving on. Here. Okay, we have a few good dungeons left. We'll get to Tazavesh in a second, and then I want to talk about these two. Ara-Kara. Okay, from a weekly key perspective, I don't understand why this last boss was so hard. Does anybody else have the experience that this key technically wasn't that bad? By all intensive purposes, it shouldn't be that bad. And yet somehow, it was the one rule I had that I would never queue for an Ara-Kara low dungeon. I would never do this on a 10. I would do any other dungeon. I would literally do Grim Batol over this in season. Because the last boss, I could not explain it. I could not explain it to you. But somehow, without fail, you would spend 30 minutes on that boss. And half the time, you wouldn't even complete the dungeon for your vault, and you would just leave. I don't physically have the words to explain how often that happened to me. Do you have the same experience? Why? Like, it's not... really, the first boss is harder than the last boss. But it's really, like, genuinely, the first boss harder than the first boss. The first part of that dungeon harder than the last part. But for some reason, the last boss just... no good. For weekly completion. I don't know why. I just really had a bad experience here. That being said, the Poison Dispel made him... So the problem with the Poison Dispel is you had like a shaman with Poison Cleansing Totem and Recall. But then people, it's like they didn't understand how the waves worked, so your melee would stack. And it's like all you have to... It's not that hard. You literally just... If the boss is here in a circle, you just stand around like in a triangle. You just 1, 2, 3. Like it's not even that much of a positioning awareness thing. You just don't stack. But not every time somebody would stack, so you would like either not use Poison Cleansing Totem or just not dispel, and you have to heal it. The changes when they brought it back for the last boss were much better, that there were 3 dots instead of 5. Big change, massive help. So the last boss in this current season doesn't feel as bad, but the initial area and the second area got worse. I don't know how they made that. The second area, remember when the guys just did a slam? That actually was way better than the massive, crazy Locust Swarm that they do this season. That AoE is that's a hard AoE to heal. And it's pretty toxic. If there's any other, the charge happens on a Clothy, done. Mage is dead. Priest is dead. Like, it's really difficult, this dungeon now. The first boss, I don't think it's a rewarding boss and has a massive learning curve. Okay, what's the good part of Ara-Kara? Oh, I'm struggling here. The first boss is fun when the fear doesn't go off. The first pull. The first pull is fun when the fear doesn't go off. It's very fun as a tank to gather that first pull. I would say that as a tank player, I really like the skill of the gather on the first pull. Okay? Because it's a way for me to flex. But for some reason, first pull, probably saving grace of this dungeon. but it's weirdly hard. So this was a rule that I have for tanking, which is that in a pug environment, even if the kick should be handled by a range, because it's like an 18 to 20 second cooldown, so you should have your range kick it. I always say at the beginning of this key, I kick the fear. You guys kick whatever. If you want to kick, kick. I kick the fear. As a tank player, I will 100% say, I will do this. And as a healer with a kick, I will also say, I'll kick the fear. I always take the responsibility because that fear goes off first, pull keys over. It's C or B. The poisons, yeah, the poisons were, originally they were so bad. C or B. Is it as bad as City of Threads? It might be. Not as bad as, is it as bad as Priory? Priory or Ara-Kara? Can it be in the same category as that? Maybe, did I rank Siege of Boralus too low? It's better than Priory, it's better than City of Threads, but it's not that good, so B. I would rather Ara over these dungeons. Did I rank Siege of Boralus too low just at my own personal bias? That one might just be, this might be my veto. I think it's better. I'll put it in B, I think. I'm okay with it in B, to be honest. There's a lot of mid dungeons. I personally just really, Siege had just, I saw wild things in this place. Yeah. Okay, I'll take that. All right. Floodgate. From a dungeon design perspective, Floodgate is kind of omega. The only reason that people don't like it is because it's hard. From a design perspective, this dungeon, after they removed Bubbles and the Blood Warper after Big Mama, is borderline cheesecake. From a dungeon design perspective. Because you have consistent big pulls, big numbers, it's just hard. Like, it's just, there's just a big, the only problem I have with Floodgate, and again, I cannot explain this because it doesn't make sense. Every time I do a dungeon with pugs, I don't expect much out of them. Okay? I don't expect a ton. All right? But when they do Floodgate, somehow their IQ drops by 20 points. It's really almost astounding how quickly the intelligence drops from my average. But let me put it this way. The bombs are not a hard mechanic on the diver pull. And yet somehow somebody walks into them every time. They're forced desync mobs. So it's not that they get rooted by the nailed gun. I swear I just see people walk into the bombs all the time so they die. But I think the biggest offender for me is the charge boss. It's not, Big Mama is actually like just hard, but it's okay. Swamp Face is hard, but it's okay. Last boss is hard, but it's okay. The charge boss has a surprisingly high death count. You know, the duo boss has a very surprisingly high brick rate. And I'm just really almost confused how this happens. All right, the last boss is very healer dependent. Which healer you're playing determines whether that's easy or hard to heal. The dual boss is weirdly, yeah, like it's not technically, but people get hit by the charge. You're supposed to dodge it. The only thing is you're supposed to dodge the charge. Like you aim it toward the bombs you want to destroy and then you move out of the way. Dodging the waves is worse. I don't know what it is. The problem is that I'll definitely put Floodgate in A. I'm a little bit hesitant to put it. I don't think I could rank it in Cheesecake, but in terms of dungeon design, you have fun HPS checks. Big Mama is it's not unfair. It's just hard. As a tank player, Big Mama is not unfair. It's just hard. Okay? Yeah, they had to change Bubbles. Bubbles was not okay because you had to skip him or you just brick, like it's not that you brick your key, but it was anti-fun to fight him. So Bubbles was a big problem, and also double Blood Warper, also a big problem. That mob hurts a lot. When you had to go to the Blood Warper after Big Mama, and in higher keys you would do this little, there was a corner that you would walk to and you would go and you would try to click the thing without aggroing the big Blood Warper. So, you know, boss charge was easy and a good boss. I'll take it. I still find the thing about that boss is you can out-heal a bomb. One of the big things that I noticed is that in a lot of Mythic Plus environments, a mechanic that's failed is just a one-shot. Like, you just die. However, if you miss one of the bombs and people pay attention, you can out-heal it. I think it's a fun... When I heal Floodgate, I feel rewarded for being good, and I feel punished for being bad. My only problem is that weekly success rate of this key is pretty low. Like, it's a hard dungeon, but out of respect for it, I feel like I have to put it in A. It's just hard. Like, especially when you get to a 19 or a 20. Like, especially when you're pushing the higher end of Brazil, this is prison. Like, these two are the most prison keys. In this current season, there's nothing, like, these two are very, very, you're in Priory prison or Floodgate prison, and you know that, right? Like, you know that. However, it's a good, this one's not that good of a dungeon, but the Floodgate is, right? So it's hard because we're not ranking this in terms of a 20. If you're putting this in a plus 20 range, like if you're putting this for like, man, this is at a competitive level, this list changes a lot because the Rookery becomes way worse and this becomes way higher, etc. Like this boss, this scale is really, really rough. Priory is so much, yeah, if you're in comms and you can coordinate and you can do some cool tech with Priory, it's actually more fun. The first boss is like no problem. First boss is like, this boss is easy when you're in a coordinated group. And when you're in pugs, as a healer, you're just like, please help. Like there are so many things that people do in Priory that actually help you versus just in an uncoordinated environment. This dungeon is really tough. So this one, we're kind of, again, the idea is between 12 and 15, thinking about a little dungeon design. Going into Midnight, I think from my perspective right now, there are a few contenders. I would say the Midnight dungeons are way better than these on average. I do think that a lot of these Midnight dungeons, I would rank so many of them right now in like Cheesecake or A. I think they could be, I hope they get everything right with Midnight because there are some kind of cool dungeons. They've made a few sus changes in my opinion, but they fixed the second boss of Pit of Sauron and like there's like pretty good polls, interesting routing. Maybe Seat of the Triumvirate still kind of sucks. But actually, like I feel like the new dungeon, Skyreach is the worst one. I don't like Skyreach as the new dungeon. It's just weirdly, it's kind of like it's sort of like Theater of Pain where it's nearly 100%. You can't really skip anything. It's very linear. Yeah. In a weird way, all the new dungeons, at first people won't like them because they'll hurt. And maybe the last boss of Windrunner Spire is going to be like, I think the last boss of Windrunner Spire random is probably an offender. And the fact that the third boss technically requires your tank to take one of the charges, otherwise it's almost unhealable. You know, but those little things, aside from that, Windrunner is like a great, well, we'll talk about that later. This is this tier list here. Okay, last few dungeons. Okay, Mists of Tir-na-Scythe. Mists of Tir-na-Scythe. I remembered this so fondly. I really, really, really liked this dungeon in Shadowlands. It was probably one of the most fun dungeons in Shadowlands. I really liked it. The first boss got annoying as key levels got higher. But overall, it was just clean. Genuinely, it was like you were like excited to get a miss key. There was a few obvious things, this going off, that going off, for sure. But I think that in Shadowlands, the experience was you rolled into a miss and you were like, yeah, good. You just have to get past the first boss, which did get very hard very quickly. Why did they change it? Why did they make it? I mean, I guess, so what they didn't want was they didn't want it to be like a Shadow Moon's Burial Ground, where it was significantly easier than the rest of the dungeon, because this was in the same dungeon as Grim Batol. You know this was the same season, right? It's kind of wild to think about this. This was the same season, which is really, I mean, they could not be more different from each other. It's pretty insane to think that this was one season. God, season 1 was not a good. Please, they can't do this again. If you take a look at this list, season 1 was not good for me. Holy. Okay. A. The unnecessary anima slashes in the maze area that clapped your tank and the RNG elements of as a tank player in Mists of Tir-na-Scythe. Do I get the pattern that goes double Guardian into double Guardian? Do I have to plan because I had to plan spell word, bubble, etc. to deal with them because they hurt so much? Or Do I get the one that goes no Guardian, double Guardian, done? Like, it's completely RNG. I never knew. Did I get the frog? Did I get the dragon? Like, maze area, not the most fun. Definitely not great. And there was the problem of DPS sometimes deciding to just double. And I was like, don't do that, please. Overall, there are saving graces for Mists. There were some fun pulls. The end, even with the AoE, I think without the weak aura to help the maze, it really, Zeta, it's surprising that this was so bad, though. Yeah, I think 12 to 15, there wasn't as many problems in this. I also don't see Ecodome here, and I realize that. I need to go find an icon for it. It was the one thing I realized I'm missing here. I think I have everything else. Ecodome will rank that higher. I think A is fine for Mist. There's really no... I just don't think... Sometimes they make Mythic Plus arbitrarily hard, and I don't know why they do that. I don't think Mythic Plus needs to be hard. I think it needs to be fun. Sometimes challenge is fun. You don't want to make it too steamroll, but like, you know. Okay, so here's my question. Streets of Wonder. We have Gambit and we have Streets down here. Streets of Wonder. Weird dungeon. Weird dungeon. 5 bosses. But in a weird way, maybe not that bad. But I don't... Is it fun? I'm thinking about this. Menagerie is just one of those bosses where it's technically not hard until people face plant into orbs. Then it's very hard. When... The best bosses you've ever encountered. Interesting. The healer tier list I'm going to update a second that there's notes. I want to change a few of my rankings on the healer tier list. The tank tier list, I'm 100% on. The tank tier list that I have made is very 100%. I know that I'm right about those takes. Yeah, exactly. Well, Ayahuasca, that's one reason I'm doing this is because I've been testing beta now for 46 days. And I have like a pretty positive opinion on a lot of these new dungeons. They said they were going to change philosophy design, and as I'm looking at this, they absolutely have. I mean, I think that tanking is maybe in trouble a little bit, but goddamn, we don't have any Grim Batol, Stone Vaults. I mean, we don't have this. This is not, there's no dungeon in the new pool that's like this. Maybe Seat of the Triumvirate's a little hard, but they already nerfed that a little bit. Streets bosses is interesting, but as a weekly key, you don't really, actually weekly key Streets is pretty good. You do fail mechanics. On a weekly key, people get hit in Menagerie, but they don't die. They'll get hit by the last boss, Ring, but they still won't die. The music boss, they'll get hit by a green puddle, but they won't die. So I feel like at a 10 to 12 or like 12 to 15, Streets weekly key has got to be A. Maybe even S, but I think A is good for this. The question is, same argument for Gambit. The same argument for Gambit. Dragon Boss. How do I rank Gambit? Because the first part of this is great. The first boss, fine. Second part, fine. There's mechanics. Yeah, you got to be careful with any overlap of kicks plus this plus the second boss actually is an example of one boss can ruin the entire dungeon. I really think one boss, because like if the second boss didn't exist, Gambit would be S, right? If the second boss did not exist, Gambit would be S. All they had to do for the second boss, I mean, maybe they would nerf it too much, but if they just made 2 ad spawns instead of 4, the second boss would be solved. Like, we called this out on PTR. We were testing and we were like, guys, the second boss is like an atrocity. The dragon boss is so ridiculously hard for both tanks and healers because it's just, a lot of it is RNG and whether your team helps you. Yeah, but even in that sense, like a water bolt goes off in a 10 to 12 Lacus and nobody dies in the first area. And even if you do die, your release is right there, so your key's not bricked. But the dragon boss, I want to rank Gambit. I think Gambit belongs. It's just like fun first pulls. The second area is decent. The last area is... the balls can be pretty toxic, and it's not that fun in the last area, but it's okay. It's decent. I just think the dragon boss is so toxic. It's one of those bosses where tanks and healers get blamed for everything, but your DPS are also supposed to help you with positioning. Not just CC, but positioning. Because if your DPS aren't stacked, then the guys start running everywhere and you can't hit them with the breath. So there's a way in hierarchies and coordinated groups, you just stack, you go boom, boom, boom. That's a good question. What is the cheesecake? There is one. It's not listed here. It's Ecodome. Dude, Dragon Boss does drag this down. I think I put it in A. I'll put it here. Well, does it belong in S, man? Weekly key. Let me put it this way. All right, here. Let me put it right here and just let's decide. Weekly key. Right now, you're on an alt, reasonably geared, but not too high item level, so you can't carry that hard. Let's say it's whatever. I don't know, reasonably, like under heroic gear. Okay. So, question for me is this. All right. Would you rather do a plus 12? Let's not say 10. Let's say plus 12 to 15, somewhere in there. Plus 12 Gambit, a plus 12 Streets, a plus 12 Priory, a plus 12 Dawnbreaker. Like, some of these are not equal to others. Like, there's definitely a right, like, you would rather queue for a Gambit 100% or a Streets. But the question is, would you rather queue for Streets or Gambit? I would do Gambit, personally. Because I don't think we're going to wipe on the Dragon Boss. I just think it'll be, if somebody's going to die, but I have a feeling as a healer I can carry it. You would go Streets? I'd go Gambit. I think that if I logged in right now and I had to do something, I'd go Gambit. Yeah, it's a fast 3 bosses instead of 5 bosses. I think that based on weekly key criteria, I would go Gambit over Streets. I think so. Now, there is borderline an even better dungeon, because you know whether it's going to brick early on, and I don't have it listed here for some reason. For some reason, I don't have it listed, but you know what it is. Ecodome. Ecodome, kind of good, actually. Ecodome is not bad. Ecodome is good. I don't have it listed. Ecodome would be cheesecake, pretty sure. And the main reason that Ecodome is cheesecake is because it is what a Mythic Plus dungeon should be. It's intuitive. That's, I think, the base thing. You don't think Gambit... So if you put Ecodome here, is Gambit comparative to Ecodome? I could hear an argument that you could go like this. I could see the Gambit here and Ecodome being the only actual S tier right now, though. I think it's A. Okay. So Ecodome goes in S. Let me go find the icon to actually properly do this. Here. Ecodome Aldani. All right. Images. We got to save one of these. What's a good image for Ecodome? Which image do you like? This one. I don't know. I don't know. This one's actually really pretty. The worm boss. Here you go. Save image. Done. Okay. Let's make sure we don't tab over to the second one, though. Gamma like more because of Sentinels. So the Sentinels are definitely atrocious mobs, but they do scale significantly differently. As in, the Sentinels on a 12 are not nearly as bad as the Sentinels on like a much, much higher key level. So Sentinels are significantly worse as the key level scales. But on a 12, on a weekly key, it's not that bad. Let's glance over this again. We've obviously spent a lot of time talking about it. I would say, and I would genuinely argue, the War Within was not a banger season for dungeons. I remember other things way more fondly. In a weird way, there are so many dungeons that I have a higher opinion of than most of the War Within dungeons. As crazy as it sounds, by the end of this, because we're at the end of the season, we're at the end of the expansion now. What do you guys think about something like Azure Vault? Do you guys remember Azure Vault? What about Brackenhide Hollow? Hear me out. What if I say these words, what do you feel? Where would you rank Azure Vault or Brackenhide Hollow in this? Yeah, in a weird way. Okay, so there's problems with both of them, of course. But solid. But like they have, maybe I would say, I don't know why. If you told me right now Brackenhide is coming back, I'd be like, okay, they're changing the last boss, right? Like that's what they're changing the last boss, right? And as long as they did that, Brackenhide would be good. The last boss, the totem in that, we had a season of Brackenhide and, well, Vortex Pinnacle. Listen, guys. As long as they don't bring Vortex Pinnacle back, I think WoW's going to be okay. Vortex Pinnacle, when you... that one, that's down here with Grim Batol. God, oh my Lord, Vortex was such a bad dungeon. It was just like anti-Mythic. It was literally, it was like anti-Mythic Plus. You can't even say Vortex as bad. I think GB might even be better than Vortex borderline. Maybe because GB was much harder. Vortex wasn't actually wasn't as hard. It was just kind of it was a weirdly stupid key. Like, it was just, you couldn't group things properly. There's a bunch of problems with Vortex. I remember in that season, I pushed kind of high, so it was like, you would do Wormstone Tech and do the Harry Potter pull under the stairs for higher keys, and that was kind of fun. Okay, we glance over this. Does anyone have any objections to where I've ranked this? Remember, that's Halls of Atonement. I couldn't find the exact images. That's Halls of Atonement, Streets, Gambit, Ecodome. Does anyone look at this and say, I veto this decision, that should be lower, this should be higher? I have very fond memories. I'm looking at this here, and I could see an argument for Siege or Boralus. Too many in A tier. What would you drop out of A tier, though? Looks like Grim. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing is, so the reason I'm doing this list, by the way, if you missed the first part, I would say the minecart is such a terrible mechanic. But Grim Batol, dude, I was watching somebody do this yesterday. Great. I mean, Shindig is amazing. Great. Fantastic. I love Shin. He's such a gamer. He's so good. But he's a DPS player. My only thing is that sometimes people who strictly play DPS, and they're very good at the game, better than me, they're unbelievably good, cannot doubt their skill. If they don't play tank or healer, sometimes they got cook takes. I will say that people who do not play tank or healer should honestly, there are some takes that are cooked. And when he put like City of Threads and Grim Batol in A, I think Grim Batol was B and City of Threads was A. And I was like, that's the most DPS brain take I ever heard in my life. That was a crazy take. And I was like, I played a little bit of DPS, but I didn't play enough DPS apparently, because wow, I know there's way more DPS in the game, but that I think is one of the problems with WoW, is I don't think there's always enough tanks and healers representing their opinion. I feel like we've yapped enough. I'm happy with this list. As a final look back, I will say once again, moving into Midnight, I would put nearly all the dungeons in. There are going to be, I think I would put some in Cheesecake, some in A. Skyreach would not be in either, but it wouldn't even be as, Skyreach maybe even C. I don't think Skyreach is a very good dungeon. I don't know why they brought it back. I can't figure out why they brought that one back, actually. Stone Vault cannot be B simply because of Skarmorak. Dude, I have trauma about that boss. I would veto my Stone Vault pick, maybe even in Grim Batol territory. Oh my god, I have trauma about Skarmorak. I had such issues with that boss. I just typed to people, please don't zug, and they zug every time. I had such issues with Stone Vault. I think that moving forward, though, they have, for the first time, I feel like almost ever, really taken a look at dungeon design philosophy, and they have made it better. I do genuinely, like, there's no first boss Priory, there's no Grim Batol. Magisters is maybe a little bit overtuned, and I think that if they maybe, like, added a little bit less of a tank absorb, the healing absorb, and maybe made it slightly more friendly and just tuned it down a little bit. Magisters, there's a route that makes that dungeon very fun. But Magisters is only fun to play if your tank knows how to do it. It's a little unintuitive, and it's going to be something that it is going to be much less fun to do Magisters in a plus 10 or a plus 12, because your tank is not going to know how to do the worms and the crystal tech, which is very specific tech. And I think that it's like I'll try to make a video saying, hey, by the way, you get a damage buff if you kill this pack right here, and then you have to chain into this pack and do this, but it's very not intuitive, and you would not know. So routing and magisters. Originally, when that dungeon came out, I was like, this gotta be one of the worst dungeons. I hate this dungeon. The more I've played it on PTR, the more I look forward to it, if and only if my tank is good. That is the one catch. My tank has to be good. It's weird. That's a kind of a weird dungeon. So I'm happy with this. All right, bet. It was very fun to talk about the game and kind of be a little nostalgic. Last take here before I actually end this video, quote unquote. What was your favorite dungeon of all time? Any season, any expansion, fondest memories of Mythic Plus. Even a specific boss. What is it for you? Best dungeon ever.